Have you ever heard of Big Bang Disruption? Today I'm speaking with Larry Downs. He's actually the author of Big Bang Disruption. It's a book that came out just a couple years ago. But we're talking about Silicon Valley. We're talking about tech startups. We're talking about how to actually put these pieces together, what disruption actually means, how culture can affect disruption, and how to look for disruptions yourself as you grow your business. We have a fascinating discussion about all things disruption, which is right up my alley. So really excited to be speaking with Larry Downs from Silicon Valley, the author of Big Bang Disruption.
Overwhelmed with online or just wanting to learn more about how you can build a successful business amidst all of the self-appointed gurus, big buzzwords and empty promises? The Breaking.Digital podcast by Doyle Buehler tells you exactly what smart entrepreneurs need to know to escape the clutter, get clear of the confusion, and pass the bullshit of building and growing a successful business online. It's about digital leadership and delivering the best value for your business online to your audience. Now, here's your host and author of the book on digital leadership and online marketing, The Digital Delusion, Doyle Buehler.
Hello and welcome back. Today I'm with the amazing author Larry Downs, who is actually the co-author of a new book, a recent book called Big Bang Disruption. And Larry is at the intersection. We actually share a lot in common. He's at the intersection of technology and strategy. And I believe you're located in Silicon Valley. Is that correct, Larry?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure.
Really appreciate it.
No, good to talk to you.
Yeah, so tell me a bit about yourself, like technology and strategy. What does that mean, and what do you do currently?
Well, I have a very long career doing a lot of things in the general area. I started out doing a big systems development with sort of large consulting firms and systems integrators, and sort of moved from there into doing more of the strategy around disruptive innovation. How incumbents can introduce that into their products and services, how they can respond to threats to their industry that come from disruptors. And a lot also these days, I think, because of sort of the changing nature of a lot of that technology, do a lot more work in the policy arena as well. I do have a law background as well, so I spend a fair amount of time advising companies on sort of the legal implications of disruptive innovation as well.
Oh wow, sounds pretty heavy. And which side do you enjoy more, the legal side or the strategic tech side?
Oh, definitely the tech side.
Okay.
The law and the policy is, as you can imagine, very slow moving, very slow to change, lots of resistance, and it really can be quite a drag.
Yeah. Well, we know the sort of the climate of politics today seems to have accelerated, but not so much as technology. So you've kind of worked in the IT areas, and then why did you decide? I mean, how many books have you written? You have like 3?
4. I have
4.
4 books that I've done.
Which ones are they?
So the first one was probably the one that's most familiar. It certainly sold the best, and that was a book called Unleashing the Killer App. And that came out and just about the kind of the crest of the first big, internet boom, the dot-com boom, and about the time when business executives in non-technology industries were finding out that the internet was something, they had to do something about it, and our book tried to help them. And then I've written 3 other books since then. One called The Strategy Machine, which was a follow-up to Unleashing the Killer App. And then I did a policy book previous to Big Bang Disruption. I did a book called The Law of Disruption, where I looked at how law and technology were intersecting, generally speaking, intersecting very poorly, and made some predictions about how that was going to only get worse as the technology got more important. That was in 2010, I believe. So clearly that prediction, not the specific one, certainly the general one, has been borne out.
Yeah. And why do you think that is? Like, is that because you've been working in technology, or you just kind of rolled the dice?
No, I think it's pretty obvious in the sense that, if you think about how information technology in particular, that's really my focus, although of course there are other very important disruptors. But IT, in the course of my career has moved from back office applications to front forward facing, customer facing applications, and now to sort of, creating whole new industries. So we have some number of trillions of dollars of new value that's been created since let's say the year 2000 or 1998 with the dawn of the internet. And when you're talking about something that's that powerful, both in terms of how much wealth it's creating and how much disruption it's causing to traditional industries, it's no surprise that the lawmakers, regulators, policy people are going to get more and more involved. In some ways, the information economy now is the economy. And so if you were, governments that were in charge of regulating the economy, your market changed and you've got to move to the new market because the old market is getting smaller and smaller all the time.
Yeah. So do you think, just briefly, is government helping the process, or is government kind of restricting it or too much regulating it?
Well, it's some of both, but by and large, government is there to get in the way. That's actually, in most cases, that's a good thing. In times of incremental change, you want your government to be small c conservative. You want change to happen very slowly. You really want them there just to kind of, enforce the rules when somebody really goes out of the lines. The problem is, of course, now we're in the midst of, one of the major economic shifts in human history. It's sort of akin to the shift from an agrarian economy to an industrial economy in the 1800s. We're doing a similar kind of shift now. And just like that last one, it's a very big challenge for governments that are there to slow things down, to move incrementally, to defend incumbent industries. This is a big challenge for them, and frankly, not one they're doing a very good job of responding to.
Okay, maybe we'll leave that one there. But what shifts do you see coming, and sort of what has triggered these shifts?
Well, again, my focus is on information technology. So I don't want to suggest that's the only one. I mean, I think there are enormous shifts going on, let's say in, genomics and material science and energy sciences. But of course, the ones I pay closest attention to are information technology. And there, in some ways, it's a little oversimplified, but not too oversimplified to say it's all about Moore's Law. So this principle from the 1960s by Gordon Moore, was the founder of Intel, who predicted that just sort of based on miniaturization and based on the increasing economies to scale of production of silicon wafers, that computing power was going to double effectively every 12 to 18 months for the foreseeable future, while the cost of a unit of computing was going to stay stable. So what that's meant is you've got sort of a principal commodity which gets better and faster and cheaper and smaller all the time. In fact, it gets so predictably. And also a nice side effect is because of miniaturization, it uses less power all the time. And when you're doubling a small number, it's not very interesting, but we've been sort of going through these doublings long enough now that every generation of new silicon technology, every new chip, every new sensor, every new device that you can buy now off the shelf can be very cheaply inserted into products, into services, into smartphones and other devices. And it's gone from sort of a novelty, let's say in the 80s and 90s, from a consumer standpoint. It's now become part and parcel of our daily, if not our hour by hour, minute by minute life. And when you have a basic commodity that's behaving that way and has been behaving that way now for 50 years, no surprise, the disruption. It's kind of like waves. When you drop a pebble in the middle of a pond, the waves just sort of move further and further out, and in some ways they get more intense the further out they get. So we're now seeing, I think, the sort of second great wave of disruption. If you think about the late 1990s, the first internet boom, it principally affected very computing and information intensive industries like consumer electronics, like computing itself, media industries, music and video and so on, to a certain extent, very heavy information users like banking and finance. Well, now we're sort of at the next great wave of disruption, and the industries that were largely left unaffected the last time around, they're the ones that are getting it now. It's things like healthcare, manufacturing, education, government, agriculture, energy. These are industries that, for a lot of economic reasons, weren't particularly disrupted by the last wave of technology, but now computing power is so ubiquitous and so cheap. And of course, we have the internet, we have networks that tie it all together, we have the cloud, we have a lot of other sort of infrastructure in place that now the disruption is happening to these industries. And in some ways, it's even more dramatic and quick than it was the last time around.
Fascinating. So how would you then in sort of the things that you do and that you see and you talk about, how do you actually define disruption?
Well, there's a lot, of course, there's a lot of debate about that, as I'm sure you know. A lot of people are sort of rely on the work of Professor Clayton Christensen at Harvard. He's the man who wrote The Innovator's Dilemma. And he had his own definition of disruption versus incremental technological change. Um, we think as I say, it's accelerated to the point where we need a new definition. So in the book, what we say is that a disruptive innovation is one that's both better and cheaper than the thing that it's replacing or competing with. So, for example, the one we start off in fact with in the book is if you look at GPS devices, right? So these were, standalone devices for navigation. You could carry them or put them in your car. And they, of course, were themselves a big disruptor to paper maps and even to printed directions off the internet. And then suddenly, with this sort of ubiquitous spread of smartphones, all it took was, one day, Google and Apple and a few others said, "Oh, well, we have access to the same GPS data. It comes from government sources. That's sort of free." And instead of a standalone device, well, we'll just use the device people already have, which is the smartphone, and we'll create an app that does exactly what these standalone GPS devices do. So, and by the way, we'll just include it in the next release of our operating software. So no one even has to go to the trouble of downloading it. It just is going to come to them. So it's free because it's on a device they already have. It's better. It's actually integrated now, with your calendar, or your contacts, or with web searches. You search for a restaurant, you just press the button, and immediately you can navigate to it without switching to another device. So this is a great example of a technology that's both better and cheaper, in this case free, than the thing it's competing against. And if you're the manufacturer of those standalone GPS devices, you don't have a lot of time to respond strategically. This is a complete disruption of your market. In this case, in a matter of months, I think being even conservative. If you weren't kind of planning for that and weren't aware that it was going to happen, it's almost inconceivable that you're going to be able to respond once it did happen. And that's certainly what happened to a lot of these manufacturers. Their consumer products business, basically went away overnight. Some of them retrenched and went into sort of more limited niche markets. But by and large, it was game over.
That's a fascinating story. I'm actually quite curious because every now and then you'll see like stacks of maps, like paper map books, and it's like I'm wondering who actually buys those. What do you think about that? Like, obviously, we've kind of that industry has disrupted,
It's
that
dead.
sort of thing. But we still can. You can still go out and buy a book of a map of a city, right?
You could certainly buy it's usually, of course, included now, I think, in a tourist guide where you have, lots of other information, of course, a lot of which you can also get for free online. But here in the United States, the major map companies, Rand McNally and the Thomas Guide, they have gone bankrupt. They are not in business anymore. So if you really were just in the business of making paper maps, you've now been doubly disrupted and you're gone.
Wow. So it's kind of like the disruption of digital cameras as well.
Yes.
Would you say that that's sort of a similar timeline where, Kodak, for example, didn't actually see this coming or they weren't quick enough and then suddenly digital cameras?
Well, Kodak is a great story, although it's also a tragic story depending on where you sit. because in fact they did see it coming. And what you'll find if you sort of go through the bankruptcy proceedings for Kodak was that they had an enormous catalog of patents for digital cameras. They had probably the best patents around. And in fact, in the bankruptcy sale, the only asset anybody bid on, nobody wanted the buildings, nobody wanted the equipment, nobody wanted, their film business at all. The only thing that anybody wanted were those patents. And so you could say, well, clearly they saw it coming. Clearly they had the means to be the disruptor rather than the disrupted. But in our research, what we found was the real problem was cultural. They just didn't have the will to accept what was literally right in front of their face. They knew it was happening, but management just said, it's just too big of a shift. We're just going to kind of close our eyes, put our head in the sand, whatever metaphor you want to use, and knowing full well that they were doomed. And sadly, that their thousands and thousands of employees were going to lose their jobs. The sort of cities, Rochester, New York, where they were headquartered, that was the main business. So really, it was a devastating blow, and one that was not a problem of technology. It was not a problem of vision. It was really a problem of management and leadership. But in our experience, in our research, that is usually what kills the incumbents. It's not that they don't know it. It's not that they don't see it in time. It's not that they don't have the resources to respond. And in fact, in many ways, they have advantages because they know the customers, they know the market, they know the regulators, they know the bankers, for financing purposes, but they just don't have the will to change, even when it's a matter of life or death.
Wow, that's fascinating. So in this equation of enabling disruption, you really need to, it's not just about the technology. It would appear it's about the cultural ramifications of the business itself. It's about leadership. It's about strategic development as well. Do you agree with that?
Yes, in fact, it's in some ways it's very similar to what I said at the beginning about governments. If you think about how, particularly a publicly traded company is organized and optimized, what the investors want to see is stability and incremental improvements. Market share increases and revenue increases, but at a sort of at an incremental pace. And as a result of that, of course, what we've done is optimize for that kind of management. So we hire and promote in public companies. We promote people who are, again, small c conservatives. What we value is their ability to keep the boat running steady on the assumption that the waters are also going to be steady. And so we've got the wrong, the problem is that's great kind of leadership for stable markets, mature industries, things where there isn't a big technology disruptor coming at you at 100,000 miles an hour. And when that does happen, it's not their fault because, again, we've picked the people who are least likely culturally to be the kind of leaders that are necessary to take the company into a dramatically new direction. And often, frankly, if they start to do that, the investors swat them down because they say, what's going on this quarter? Why are you spending all this money on new development or new research or new products or going into new markets? Because often the investors are also people who, again, we've optimized for very conservative thinking on Wall Street. And so they don't want the leaders to change, even if the leaders have the will to change. And that's usually what brings down the incumbents in these big industry shifts because of disruptive innovation.
Because they're trying to maintain that small c conservatism to sort of maintain the company, yet they're faced by this disrupting technology.
Yeah, they were hired, they were trained, they were retained, not for their ability to innovate, but for their ability to keep things going. And they're evaluated by people who are also, hired, trained, promoted, and so on for the very same skill set. So they've got the wrong skills. They're evaluated by the wrong people. And that's why invariably you see that the real change happens from startups, from people who frankly don't know the business at all. Who have nobody looking over their shoulder. They have no one telling them, what not to do. They don't really know the rules, so it's easy for them to break them.
And they make them up as they go.
And of course, most of them fail as well. You think about it's always hindsight is 2020 here. If you think about the disruptors, we tend to think about the ones that have been, massively successful, like Amazon and Google and Apple and companies like that. But you have to always remind yourself, for every Amazon, there were hundreds, thousands of startups that had a similar intent, a similar business model, who didn't succeed because good idea is very small percent of what leads to success in this kind of business. Obviously, people like Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs and others clearly have deeper insight, an ability to motivate people, all the sort of leadership skills that you need. But they come from nowhere. They just sort of they come from a magic place, and they're in the right place at the right time, and they get the right backing, and they hire the right team. They're the ones that succeed. The incumbents fail, and frankly, most of the startups fail too.
Yeah, actually, I gave a presentation recently where I talked about the Australian statistics, and it's pretty similar. Where any small to medium enterprise, over 60% of them actually don't make it past year 3.
Mm-hmm.
Which is quite, that's quite significant. And yes, there's, the strategy and how to manage cash and basic accounting and whether it's a good idea or not. But at the end of the day, it's like, how do you bridge that gap? And a company like Amazon obviously has, bridged that. But what can you see as sort of that? How can more companies bridge that gap between, startup to functioning, living, breathing company that's producing some brilliant, remarkable products or services?
Well, a lot of it, I think, it's not magic. A lot of it is just hard work. Clearly, the most important thing is just getting a balance between the sort of emergency nature of a startup, and then at the same time building a platform that's going to be sustainable as a business. So a lot of these companies, their first product can be wildly successful, but they don't, have the resources to build them, to deliver them, to service them. If they're physical products or if it's software, they're so busy kind of fighting fires with the first release that they don't have anybody thinking about what's the next product, what's the next, if it's a game company, you can have this wildly successful game app, but the half-life is going to be very short. And if you aren't thinking ahead, if you just sort of imagine now you've become invulnerable, which many of these people do, because again, they don't have any experience to the contrary, they don't think about the next thing. They don't build a team, or they don't build an infrastructure that will allow them not to go from just being a one-hit wonder to being an actual sustainable business that's in the business of producing hit after hit after hit after hit. So there's a very delicate balance, and I think a lot of it comes down to the investors. Right? So here in Silicon Valley, what we see is that the smart investors, the smart money, the good venture capitalists or the good angel investors are not just people who give money. Money is a fungible commodity. What these genius inventors and entrepreneurs really need, in a certain sense, is adult supervision. They need someone who's been experienced. They've seen the life cycle of startups many, many times. They can recognize kind of the key inflection points when it's time to move from, kind of giving the product away to thinking about a revenue model, but not too soon. When it's time to think about the next product, when it's time to bring in management in addition to just the kind of visionary founder. A lot of these key decision points, it really takes a lot of experience and insight to see them. We don't really expect the entrepreneurs to have that because many of them are kind of first timers. They're very young. We don't really want them to be distracted by that. We want them to think about the vision of the very first, kind of killer app or big bang disruption. And so if you look at it, I think the companies that do the best, what you'll see behind each of them is a very involved, very experienced investor, whether it's an angel or a VC, who knew when to intervene gently but firmly at the very, very important moments in the life cycle.
Do you think that they could restrict that though? restrict the growth and restrict the flow of innovation and disruption?
Sure. No, absolutely. What you don't want are investors who are too involved or who kind of pull the triggers too soon or at the wrong time or insist, we got to start making money now. We got to turn a profit next quarter. We've got to, do these things for short-term gain. Eventually, you have to do those things. But yes, absolutely. As you know, if you do them too soon, you kill the company. And in some ways, that's really the difference between a smart investor and a bad investor.
Yeah, well, you need some criteria for that. Moving forward from sort of the startup, okay, we can kind of see how disruption works and sort of the critical factors that are important to sort of maintaining it and growing the company right beyond the 2 or 3 years past startup. What about those businesses that are 5 years old and more? Can they disrupt? How do they disrupt? Take us there.
So they can. And as I said a moment ago, in many cases, the industry incumbents, and you say, 5 years, I'm talking about 100-year-old companies. They can do it. We had examples in the book of very mature companies in very mature industries that were able to be the leaders of disruption largely at the expense of their traditional competitors who just were behind the curve or weren't on the curve at all. And it's very interesting. I think what you see is that, again, the companies that do that, sometimes it's because they're not public companies, they're private companies, they're family-owned businesses, for example, where they got a little bit more room to maneuver than a public company might on a sort of quarter-to-quarter basis. Often it's because there's somebody, it may be the CEO, it may be the chief technology officer, it may just be a very senior engineer who really gets it in terms of where the disruption is coming from and sees both how devastating it's going to be to the traditional business, but also sees how the traditional business still has assets that could lead it to the sort of the next S curve. If only they move quickly enough, or in some cases just more quickly than their traditional competitors. We did a case study in the book about Philips, the Dutch company. They were one of the inventors of incandescent light bulbs. It's a very profitable business for 100 years, and Philips was one or number two in the world producing them. But somehow, distinct from all the other traditional manufacturers, they understood that the sort of growth curve of LED technology was on a path that was at some point going to pass that better and cheaper inflection that I mentioned before, and that at that point, the incandescent bulb business, 100 years old, was suddenly going to be unprofitable, unsustainable, and nearing the end of its life. And they were able to, interestingly, sort of shed a lot of the assets from that old business. A lot of times they were selling it to their competitors who weren't quite looking so far ahead.
Didn't see it, yeah.
And then they shifted, out of that business into the LED business. They bought up a lot of startups in smart lighting. So you see they have a product line called Hue, where they do smart LED lighting and lighting systems, so that rather than selling just the bulbs, they're now selling the software. Of course, that puts them very deeply into things like the Internet of Things and connected homes and connected buildings. And they really put themselves in a position where they could be the sole survivor, but a very good survivor of a business that had, operated largely on its own without a lot of intervention for a good 100 years.
Fantastic. So, but at the same time, they would, have that strength of that. That base of being such a large, timely company, whereas you would have, and sorry, I don't know the industry for LED bulbs, but you'd also have these startups, would you not, that sort of would be trying to disrupt the same industry, and how does that conflict get resolved?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the ways we say in the book is when you see a lot of startup activity in your industry, where people are building things that are very disruptive. Mostly, again, if you followed Professor Christensen uh, you would say, okay, well, these are very unsuccessful business. They're very, they're microscopic compared to you. Their price is too high. They don't have any access to the market, to the customer base. And a kind of traditional innovation thinking, you don't do anything at that point. You wait until they've kind of reached a point where they can be competitive on price and performance. But what we saw is that because the time period from you know terrible failure to total success gets shorter and shorter, that the successful incumbents were the ones that took that as a sign. As I say, when they see all the startup activity, which has no impact on their bottom line, but that's their signal that something is going to happen, probably a lot sooner than they think or that they can project. And so that's when they start investing in the same technologies. That's when they start buying up the most promising startups when they're still affordable before they become, billion-dollar enterprises, and integrate that new thinking, those new technologies into their business before the big bang happens.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Can you sort of then are there industries that never would disrupt or won't change, or they'll still be the same in 50 years or 100 years, or are we talking everything here?
I think the short answer is we're talking everything. I mean, one of the things that we found is sort of the gating factor that slows down disruption the most is if it is a very heavily regulated industry. So, if you've got barriers to entry, like let's say in healthcare, I might invent terrific technologies that improve the way in which certain healthcare procedures or diagnoses or whatever it is are done, but I can't perform as a doctor no matter how good my technology is. I'm completely and effectively barred from the practice of medicine or the practice of law or from being a power utility, many other fields, running a taxi service or running a hotel service, as we've seen in the fights with Uber and Airbnb. Uh, the regulation, if it's so intense that it really makes it impossible to enter the market, then it doesn't matter how much better and cheaper the disruptive technology is, you can't get into the market legally. And of course, the incumbents are going to throw everything they've got at you if they see you trying. Then effectively you can stay out of being disrupted as long as that kind of regulatory edifice holds. And I think that probably because I have personal experience here as a on again, off again academic, but higher education is a great example of this. The great technology genius Alan Kay, many years ago, famously said the last great technology to affect education was the book, and they still haven't adapted. If you
Okay.
go to a public university or a private university, it really looks like a medieval university. They haven't really
Mm,
changed. And it's not because there isn't technology that would make it more effective and more efficient and more productive and serve more people and do it more cheaply and cost effectively. They just don't want to. And for now, they don't have to. Nibbling around the edges, of course, there's lots of startups and technologies that are offering better and cheaper alternatives to that education. But by and large, it's up to them to say when they're going to be disrupted or not. And
mm.
not surprisingly, so far they've said no, thank you.
No thanks. Until somebody does it and they go, wait a sec, you can't disrupt us.
Yeah, yeah, and then they spend
Actually,
all their energy trying to stop it rather than
yeah.
trying to do it themselves.
Yeah, we've heard that story before. But actually, just all related to that, I mean, books aren't necessarily a disruption, but ebooks, are they really or are they not? And there's sort of been a recent drop in ebooks sales worldwide. Why might that be happening?
I don't know. I mean, so obviously, digital books have dramatically disrupted traditional publishing, but it's more than the ebooks. Obviously, it's really, the web in the larger sense, that the way in which content is now created, how research is done, how writing is done, how publishing is done, how distribution is done, how people make money from writing, all of that is in, I think comfortably we can say it's in chaos. But the good news for consumers is there's so many new ways to try to experience content, whether it's written or audio or or video, or of course increasingly a combination of all of them. Um, it's not really clear, how many successful business models are going to come out of this and what they're going to look like and who's going to offer them. But in many ways, it's a golden age for consumers in terms of the amount of content, the access to it, the devices in which they can enjoy it, the ways in which they can experience it, and the cost, which is in many cases free. It's a very difficult time to be a traditional publisher, whether that's of a book or magazines or newspapers, or even broadcast television or pay TV. The business models are definitely in chaos in a good way. And as I say, right now for consumers, it's a great deal. They can experience whatever content they like in any way they want, while the industry kind of sorts itself out and figures out, what are the right ways to do it, what are the ways that will make money and that can be sustainable, and ultimately, of course, that's the win-win.
Yeah, so it's basically it's market driven. Then it's what can we produce for the consumer.
I'd say it's beyond market driven. It's consumer driven.
Consumer driven. Okay.
In a way that it wasn't before. This is, sort of the story in many industries is that, of course, we always say the customer's always right or the customer has all the power. But the truth is, that's only true if the customers can get together and kind of act collectively on their preferences, on the products they want, on the services they want, the prices they want to pay. We didn't have that before the internet. It was really very difficult and very expensive for consumers to act collectively, even just to kind of collect their collective thoughts about, did I like it or did I not like it? And then we started seeing things like the review sites, and even more informal through social media. And now you see that consumers really do very quickly and very efficiently, and sort of almost in a mob mentality. If there's 10 new models of smartphones or 10 new models of television sets or other consumer electronics, the market is going to pick the winner very quickly and very definitively, and nobody else is really going to make very much profit. The only person who's really going to be able to make a profit is the one or maybe the number two most popular, and that's going to be a very short life cycle. But the other eight are going to become commodity goods, and really it's the consumers now who are driving that life cycle, making it shorter all the time, really forcing tremendous competition in a lot of these industries that's devastating to all but the most tough-edged competitors.
It sounds pretty grim then for businesses, unless
Well,
they disrupt. Then unless they create that disruption.
right. If they're number one or two, it's actually great. It's a great business. It's wonderful to be Apple.
True. Yeah.
It's wonderful to be Samsung,
Yeah.
in many cases. And then you've got momentum too. So consumers will give you sort of a certain amount of the leeway. If you stumble on one product release, yeah, okay, they're going to forgive that. Look at the video game console business is very similar. The television, the sort of monitor business is very similar. LG and Samsung, and you see that the others either kind of just dwindle away, or they just serve kind of the bottom end of the market. No, it's a great time to be a consumer. That's for sure. But for businesses that understand the consumer is the driver and that nurture that relationship, it's a great time to be a business too.
Yeah, no, for sure. But they have businesses, I think, have a lot to learn in terms of how do they actually do that. How would you quickly teach somebody? Obviously, we can't do a course here, but how would you show somebody or teach somebody here? This is how you can identify disruptions. This is what you should do. Is there sort of a quick step? Obviously, that's a loaded question, but are there a few quick steps that you could say, hey, look, if you're looking to disrupt, this is what you need to do?
Yeah, I think there's one quick step. And again, it's one we saw in our research in both startups and incumbent businesses that were successful. And that was really to listen to consumers, to open channels through social media, through Twitter, through Facebook, through chat rooms, whatever. Actually, all of the above is the right answer. and open those channels in a way that consumers really did have the opportunity to speak their mind. That you didn't overly moderate, or you didn't overly curate it, or you didn't overly control it, so that it was just a kind of, oh, this is my brand, and I'm really trying to maintain it, and leave it in the hands of sort of the marketing folks or the public relations folks. Really open the channel and let consumers tell you what they want in products, or tell you what they like or don't like about your existing products, because they will do it. If they really feel that they're being listened to, they will be the best source of sort of free product design and product training and product improvement that you could ever pay for, and they'll happily do it for free. We had an article, my co-author and I wrote an article recently for a publication called The Bao Review. It's a Chinese publication where we looked at the giant appliance company Haier, which recently acquired GE Appliances here in the U.S. So they're now an even more gigantic appliance company. And because they are principally in China, serving the gigantic Chinese market for effectively consumer electronic goods that have very short lives, that are very competitive in terms of pricing. What they found was that by opening through WeChat and some of the other tools that are very popular with Chinese social media users, they would have conversations with hundreds of thousands of customers about their products and what they liked and didn't like, and ideas for new designs or new products or new services that they actually listened to and produced, and learned how to produce on very, very short design cycles. That's really been the key to their ability to stay one of these very few profitable companies making consumer electronic goods.
So it really comes down to listening, and nowadays those businesses have the tools, right? Every single business has those tools.
Yeah, I think it's that simple. I mean, obviously, there are many more complicated things, but you're asking about a first step, and I think the first and biggest step is just listen to customers.
See what's happening. That's fantastic. Cool. Just about wanting to wrap up. It's been a wonderful, wonderful conversation, Larry. I really appreciate it. Who are your, the last question, who are the next Kodaks and the map book builder or publishers, and who do you see coming as those disrupting technologies or businesses rather?
Yeah, so it's very embarrassing to pick startups that look promising, because then it turns out the next day they're not. But certainly the technologies that I'm paying the closest attention to, obviously the Internet of Things, and just kind of the introduction of sensors into everyday devices, or into things you wear or things that go into your body. So from a healthcare standpoint, sensor technology is incredibly high potential disruptor. That goes, I think, as well in manufacturing. We're looking, very closely at 3D printing, how that will change both kind of the market for parts, reused parts, spare parts, as well as kind of for on-demand manufacturing, for customization. Again, in healthcare, 3D printing is revolutionizing the creation of prosthetics in a really remarkable way. And in time, it may be used to print organs, and print other kinds of life-saving technologies. Certainly, looking at again in terms of energy, looking at the sort of advances in solar and LED, and things like the carbon fibers that have these tremendous conductivity properties. The human genome, we don't really know what's going to come out of that, but we know it's going to be quite dramatic. Autonomous vehicles, this is a revolution that's going to happen very quickly. I don't know if it's today, it's 2 years or 5 years, but when it does happen, it will happen very quickly. And so it's one that will, not just change how we drive, but where we live and where we work, how we think about going from place to place. So these are some of the technologies that I'm paying the closest attention to.
Excellent. And who's the next dinosaur, or is there?
Yeah, well, as I say, the industries that largely escaped, and I should have mentioned, sorry, I forgot, I didn't even mention artificial intelligence, big data, 5G, wireless communications. These are other ones. But as I said before, the industries that largely avoided much harm in the first internet boom, they're the ones that got the target on their back now. So, very clearly incumbents in businesses like energy, manufacturing, agriculture, education, government services, financial services, to the extent that they kind of survived the first round. The next round is going to, blockchain and other technologies are going to rewrite the rules there as well. And let's see, what else? Well, what else is there? Well, professional services, healthcare, doctors, lawyers, accountants. Medicine as general is ripe for disruption. I think, at least in this country, we desperately need it to be disrupted because it's clearly not working now. Insurance, automobile manufacturing.
Sounds
pretty
like
much
everything.
Did I leave anybody out?
No, I don't think so. Builders, construction. Actually, no, you did, because those were 3D printing, 3D manufacturing.
Yeah, we'll just 3D print the buildings.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay, well, listen, Larry, I need to let you go. Otherwise, I'd keep you here for hours. But it's been a wonderful, wonderful discussion. How can we find you online in the digital space?
So thank you. First of all, I really enjoyed it too, Doyle. And I know, these are things that are near and dear to your heart as well, which makes it much more fun to talk about. So I'm on Twitter at Larry Downs. I'm on Facebook. You can follow the Big Bang Disruption page. And then, of course, my website is at larrydowns.com.
And that's Larry, LARRYDOWNES.com.
That's me.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much. And for all our listeners, you can find the notes to this episode on Breaking.Digital. And really, again, want to thank my guest, Larry Downs, the author of Big Bang Disruption and many amazing 3 other books as well. Take a listen, take a read, see what he has to say, because it's some fascinating stuff. And have a good day, and we'll see you online. Thank you very much for listening to Breaking Digital, the podcast for smart entrepreneurs wanting to become true digital leaders in their industry and to own online. If you have any comments on the program, please feel free to connect on Twitter at Doyle Buehler with the hashtag #OwnOnline. I would really appreciate it if you could share this podcast with your network, as I'm sure they will get some value from it for building their successful business online as well. You can find the resources that we talked about, as well as the transcript and full podcast for download on thedigitaldelusion.com/podcast or on iTunes or on SoundCloud. I'm Doyle Buehler, and I will see you online.
Thank you for listening to Breaking Digital with Doyle Buehler. While he goes and makes a sandwich, you can find all of the notes, links, and details on this podcast by visiting thedigitaldelusion.com/podcast. Go on and click that now. www.thedigitaldelusion.com/podcast. I'll definitely click that. If you'd like a free copy of the book, The Digital Delusion, How to Overcome the Misguidance and Misinformation Online, just send an email to doyle@thedigitaldelusion.com. See you online.